Welcome everyone. We're going to start letting folks in. It'll take a minute just to let the queue in, but for those who are starting to join, we are excited to have this hour with my friend Reggie Hubbard. We'll take a minute more for a formal introduction here. Just another minute. Looks like we're... And as you do, when you do lead your sessions, I will tell you and everybody else that we are recording this. It is a webinar, so other people are not on the screen anyway. We have found it's a little easier to maintain the groups without everyone on the screen, but Allison's asking folks to put questions in the queue. And we were saying before we started to welcome everyone in that Reggie got probably more questions than we've had. This is our 6th week. I'll just launch into kind of my opening. Amy Pritchard, I am the founder of GAINPOWER. We are a community platform for the people who work in democratic and progressive politics. We have a mission to support the talent in this space, the individuals who work in both the partisan world and the progressive nonpartisan world. And we have another mission. We're sort of pivoting really in many ways. We've long been known as a job bank and as a place that employers come to find talent, but we're really trying to open up the space to nurture people throughout the course of their career, not just entry. But we find that a lot of people come to us maybe for the first time, whether they're in their 20s, their 30s, or their 40s, or more, higher, you know, looking to understand our world and how do you break in or how do you make changes. And one of our real missions is to diversify, demystify, democratize our space, which is often very opaque and not open for a whole lot of reasons, none of which are worth really explaining, although Reggie, I'm sure you'll go on a tangent or two about them. But, you know, we do have an incredibly diverse ecosystem of organizations and people that work in this movement, thank God, today, because we need every last one of them. But we also have a lot more people who want to be part of it, and sometimes they find it hard to break in. So a lot of the questions that we tend to get to our panelists, and you'll see some of these, are about just how do we get into this movement. And so we started this series. It was really a reaction to some of the career fairs that we did of just interviewing some of the top leaders in the progressive movement to talk about their professional journeys, to talk about kind of the different paths they took and the moments that they maybe it changes, and obviously to open it up for questions and advice. So I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you, Reggie Hubbard. I will take a personal moment, and I know you're expecting this, but maybe everyone else isn't, to give personal gratitude and personal thanks for you and for everything you do for so many of us, but especially for me. I will tell everyone that I've probably seen more of Reggie than almost anyone else, maybe except for a couple of our staff through this pandemic. And that is because in addition to being the campaign director and senior strategist for MoveOn, which we'll spend more time talking about, he's also a yoga teacher. I know you're past 500 now, but I think you still call it 500. Right. Five yoga classes and meditation. It's not just yoga. It's a lot of meditation and just space for people in our movement. And I have been fortunate enough to be able to make time and take time. And really through the course of this pandemic, I think I've maybe missed a week or two. But most weeks I've tried to take not just one, but 2 or 3 if I can. And it's really been the only time that I've kind of stopped to take space, to take time, and just, you know, feel all the feels, not just move, which is also important, but to really appreciate what's going on. And so you've led that for me, and I know for many, many others. So I just want to give you personal thanks and to sort of put you in context that you aren't just a progressive activist, which you of course are. as I was telling you before we invited the rest of the group here, Josie and Aviance, some folks, if they've joined us before, have met them, but they both work with us at GAINPOWER. And we asked them to lead these sessions. I joke about, but I'm quite serious. My goal is to turn them into the rock stars I already know they are in this movement. They're new to it, so they bring a fresh perspective. And I'm excited that they're going to lead you on the questions, both the ones that we came up with and ones that are from the participants. So with that, I'm going to take a step back, maybe turn my camera off and just play watch myself.
Thank you, Amy.
Hello again. I'm going to start off the questions. So, how did you get your start in politics?
I started in politics because I was mad at George W. Bush and I thought the Iraq War was the worst thing ever, right? So like, I'll make this short because this story is long, but I'll make it hella short. I was on sabbatical in Rio de Janeiro. I'd left the country, I had expatriated. So I moved to Rio after 9/11 because I saw the plane hit the Pentagon and basically was like, see, I told y'all George Bush sucked, I'm out of here. This is the worst. So moved to Brazil and went there to learn Portuguese and forget about the United States of America. And the Iraq War started when I was there, and all of my Brazilian friends are like, what's the matter with your country? I'm like, y'all know that I'm here, right? Like, we're having this conversation in Rio. Like, I'm not here to talk about the States. So did what anyone would do in their late 20s, which is completely try and party away my conscience, right? So went to Carnival and then like partied for like 3 months afterwards, but then woke up one day, still had that fire in the belly, that conviction in my spirit, and was like, okay, you tried, like, you still care. You tried to party your care away, it's still there. So what are you gonna do about it, right? So I got on a plane, came home with tears in my eyes, and this is what I tell folks, they be careful what you wish for, because when it happens, you can't say no. I was like, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna make a difference because George Bush is the worst. So I said that, got on the plane, came back home. Then 9 months later, I went from the mailroom in the John Kerry campaign, because of course you put like Ivy League graduates in the mailroom, whatever. Went from the mailroom to traveling staff for the 2004 presidential campaign. So left Brazil, like, I'm gonna go make a difference. And like I said, be careful what you wish for, because the ancestors, they listen, man. And so not 9 months later, I'm traveling staff, looking around being like, hi, Mr. Kerry, hi, Mr. Edwards.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. Well, we'd love to hear about your journey in yoga. Can you tell us how you straddled those two worlds and what got you into yoga?
Yeah, for sure. So, so backtracking a bit, I go from Brazil. I was the best shape of my life in Brazil, and then worked 3.5 years in campaigns. So adopted all of the bad habits, right? So no sleep, crap diet, like chain smoking, bourbon for breakfast, like all the things. So went from like 235 pounds to like 330 in about 2 years, right? Just because like 18-hour days, like bam, 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 bam. So needless to say, when I took a hiatus from politics in 2009, I had no intention of ever going back. I was like, you know what? I ran myself into the ground. Like, you know, y'all can keep this. Like, I'm sure everyone's had one of those experiences. Like, I'll never do this again until I do. But so basically, long story short, fast forward. So that was 2009. Fast forward to 2015. I had moved from DC to Denver, Colorado, and I moved to work for a nonprofit. And it was actually a dream job, right? So it was doing like work with youth in Brazil. And so I got to speak Portuguese, travel back and forth to Brazil. And day 1 through 5, it was a dream job. Day 6, it became a nightmare, which is still a dream. So honestly, I started practicing yoga to keep from cursing out my boss, honestly, because she was horrendous and just tried to haze me psychologically. And so like, I got a bit of fire in the belly. So I'm like, if you don't figure out a way to calm your African-American self down, you are going to lose this job, and you need to stay long enough to collect the $3,000 that you paid to move here even before the bait and switch happened. So I started practicing yoga to not curse out my boss. And what I didn't know, and it was bad, y'all. I went like sunrise and sunset for 6 days a week. What I didn't know what was happening is that it was lowering my blood pressure. It was making me super calm and focused. And it was giving me the space to not react to what's happening externally, so much so that when I got fired from that job 7 months later via text message. I told y'all it was bad. They fired me via text message. And I was like, they were like, we should have an exit interview. And I was like, that is a waste of both of our time. Y'all know that. Like, blessings, but I'm not gonna do that. But I was like, but I do wanna tell you something. And they're like, what's that? I was like, I wanna thank you for how poorly you treated me, because you gave me the wisdom on how to handle adversity with love and grace. Bowed and left. That happened in 10 months. So I went from like wanting to curse them out on the daily to, when they fired me via text message, responding like that. Not even in a shady way, but just kind of like, look, I actually appreciate how crappy you treated me because you gave me this yoga thing. So thank you for that. And then after I was fired via text message, 2 weeks later, I'm on the Bernie Sanders campaign. So I'm never going to do politics again until Bernie's folks call me. And I'm like, oh man. So I go to one of my yoga teachers. I was like, man, look, last time I did politics, like it almost killed me, right? I gained all this weight and had all these bad habits. Like I'm kind of terrified to go back into the hustle. And he was like, Reggie, here's what you have now that you didn't have then. He's like, you have discipline, you have focus, you have habits that you're committed to. He's like, so use this experience on the Sanders campaign as a cosmic karmic mulligan to try this campaign life over again. And I was like, you know what? That's wisdom, dude. So gave him a pound, and that's what I did. So in the Bernie Sanders experience, I went to them, I was like, look, I would love to work for you, but my yoga practice is pretty sacred. So if your campaign gets in the way of my practice or my health, I'm quitting. And they were like, ha ha. I was like, I'm very serious. I'm more serious than you can understand. And I was like, and also bear in mind that what you want me to do, not that many people can do, and I'm Black. So like, ain't that many people that can do what I do, and I'm Black. So if you want me, these are my requirements. And they said yes. And because of my discipline to the practice of yoga, like I was able to be one of the main wizards of the road experience for Bernie Sanders 2016.
Wow, it sounds like your journey has taken you in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
Some of the most important decisions you made in your career path.
Some of the most important decisions have been, well, it's all right. So not exactly, hold on to your personal power. So the best decisions I've ever made are to be true to me, right? So even if that means sometimes that you're in the wilderness for a bit, right? So like I haven't always been beloved in the political community. I used to do this thing called Advance. So Advance is like special forces for political production. So shout out to special forces. I'm not saying that we're anywhere near military, but if you view the political system as the war of ideas, then advanced people are special forces to implement those ideas, right? So it's like your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to produce this rally in a day. So, I did that for a while. And in advanced world, you can either be beloved or on the blacklist, no pun intended, like that. So there were times in my life where I was like, Reggie, you should do this. And I was like, I remember how you treated me and I refuse to be treated that way. So I choose not to accept this opportunity because it violates my personal integrity, right? And people are like, you said no to that? I'm like, yeah. Because like for me to say yes to that would mean that I would demean myself. And I remember how y'all treated me. So I'm not gonna do that, right? So every time I've made a decision to be in keeping with my integrity, I've never regretted it. That meant that I was like in the wilderness for a while. So like all these great jobs I have now, there was a time where I was like walking around and hoping people would call me back. But I refused to work with people who treated me poorly, in the political world. Because more often than not, it's gotten a lot better than it has been in the past. But people used to be viewed as expendable. And I was like, nah, that's not true. And not only is it not true in general, but you are not going to find a African-American Ivy League graduate who speaks 3 languages and has a master's degree from a European institution. I'm like the black unicorn in this piece. And you wanna act like I'm expendable? Like, I'm not gonna do that. So if you're not gonna accept me for what I offer, I'm not gonna offer it. So that's some of the best decisions. And the other decision I would say is always have good friends, right? Keep your circle around you tight. So the best decisions I would make, which seems kind of counterintuitive because we're talking about career, but hear me out here. You need good friends to bounce ideas off of, because my friends are the ones that be like, yo, you said you would never do this, man. You know, because, you know, I sound all strong now, but you know, if you get a good offer, you're like, yo, really, I should give it a shot. Reggie, you said, I'm like, right, got it, thanks, right? So every decision I've made that's in keeping with my personal integrity, I'd never regretted. And my friend circle, I've kept them tight for about 20 years. So yeah, my good friends and my integrity.
Well, sounds like you've experienced a lot of resistance and everything, but
Sure.
did
make it fun.
I feel like you probably did have experiences with imposter syndrome, but more importantly, what advice do you have for other people who are going through it, especially like young people who are going into politics?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. I have one of my favorite cousins, he's 27, and he calls me all the time. He's like, because, what about this? What about this? And so this is where yoga teacher cousin comes in and is like, listen, at a certain level of life, if you weren't meant to be there, you wouldn't be there, right? Especially if you're of color and or woman, like if you get the opportunity, you're supposed to be there. Like, you know, people of color got to work their behinds off. Like I said, they had a Yale graduate who's trilingual, who just left a Brazilian sabbatical in the mailroom on the John Kerry campaign, right? That's where they had me. So when the seas broke and I got to be on traveling staff through following just basically the crumbs that the universe laid out before me, I did have imposter syndrome for a day, but then I was like, you know what? I'm here though, you know? So that's where radical presence comes to play. Like, give gratitude for the experience. So rather than think that you're not capable of doing it, give gratitude that you have the experience. Be like, yo, I'm here. Thank you. And then walk forward from a spirit of gratitude, because I would say imposter syndrome is rooted in scarcity. You don't think you have enough. You don't think you are enough, or those sorts of things. Whereas if you have a gratitude bent, you're like, yo, I am enough, and thank you for this. This is more than enough, and I will work this opportunity from this sense of enoughness, right? So hear me out on that. Like, so imposter syndrome, I understand it. And the other thing I would say is that white supremacist culture feeds imposter syndrome. So for me, activist dude, anything I can do to be defiant towards white supremacy, I do. So if that personal talk, that pep talk didn't work for you, be defiant. You know what I mean? I'm supposed to be here, not on some I'm better than you stuff, but I'm supposed to be here. My ancestors and my mentors sacrificed in order for me to be in this spot. So I'm here, and I'm about to do this work. Yeah, and Juliana, I appreciate that. So like, if Trump could be president, yeah, that's what I was going to end with. Like, if Donald Trump, the king of the worst, can be president, you can be whatever you want to be. Please. Like, this dude has made the worst like his best job.
Well, let's shift more to your specific position.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about MoveOn. Like, what is your role there? And what do you think the impact is that MoveOn has had on the progressive movement?
So MoveOn's been around since I think 98 or so. So in terms of like, that's eons in terms of progressive movement, right? So if you've been around since 1998, you know, that's like elder statesman OG status in some ways. And not only has it been around for that long, it's continually innovated itself, right? So what MoveOn was in 98 is not what it is in 2019, 2020. It is not what it will be in the future. So there is an adaptability that comes from the DNA of the culture. So it's a rapid response campaigning organization that's digital first, but also makes sure that we have members engaged. So if we need to, say, call mass protests when the president decides to jail children, We can do that in 850 spots with 50,000 people in our marquee thing in a week. You know what I mean? So like having the muscle memory to like service members with information and have them connected. So when we need to do rapid response, we do that. What we're doing in this election cycle is, given the fact that the pandemic has like taken us off the streets to some extent, using digital platforms to mobilize and engage voters with compelling content, but also vote tripling and those sorts of things, using our network as an opportunity to get people to the polls and then remind other people to do the same. What's my role? My role is a congressional liaison and senior political strategist. So I'm the guy who is on the phone with Nancy Pelosi and her people. I'm the guy who's on the phone with like Chuck Schumer and his people, either saying, here's what we would want you to consider, and or how can we help you effectuate what needs to happen, right? So one example I use often is, so in the impeachment process, I was one of the main strategists around that. So in the beginning, no one wanted to do it except the grassroots. So we had to like be steadfast and keep telling the House, do it, do it, do it, almost to the point of calling them out and calling them cowards. So we had to straddle that line of being like, you're not doing enough, but please keep doing it. And then once impeachment became a thing, which was, God, about a year ago, my job went from like being agitator on the outside to being strategist on the inside, right? So telling them, here's what's happening in your district, here's what's happening here, member here, you know, like, so basically I am the line between the grassroots. You know how like states, like you're like the borderline, I'm the borderline between the establishment and the grassroots. So I'm the bridge between the two of them.
So what would you say makes you most successful in your role as a political strategist?
That I have a unique experience, right? That I don't have a typical background. That my first job out of college, I was a roadie for a jazz band, right? And then I was in global marketing for a sales company, right? So I view politics as, so part of the reason that I think I was so successful on the road and in like advance is because I have a marketing mind. You know, I used to sell products. And so for me, I'm like, yo, what's the message that gets us the currency, which is the vote? Or what's the thing that we can do to impact our communication strategy? So rather than viewing it as like, oh, I need to do this project, I'm looking at it from like, I look at politics from a business angle. And, you know, I also have an MBA, right? So I have a business degree, even though I do all this political stuff. So the way that I look at politics is completely different than a lot of my colleagues, right? So that's one thing. The other thing too is that I also am grounded in my experience, but also in my yoga practice. So like that's been the thing that has been a key differentiator. So when all this bad news is happening, you all heard it when we were on the phone. Like Amy asked me, how am I holding up? I'm like, I'm good. Like, I don't understand how, but I'm good. Like, I'm so focused on like my peace and well-being and being able to share that with other people that it keeps me focused on the work. Instead of being like, oh, freaking out, like I'm pretty laser focused on my responsibilities so I can make responsible decisions and not be all caught up in my emotions or the histrionics of the moment.
So like beyond self-care and all of that, what are some other important skills that you think a political strategist should have?
Well, I'm going to go back to that. Self-care should be number one. So beyond that,
yeah, number one, but yeah.
One and two, right? Because you can't give what you don't have. Resourcefulness, right? You got to be in a situation, and when it doesn't go your way, like have a creative mind to figure out how to do that, right? You got to be good with people. You really got to be good with people. So there are some relationships that I have that I met in the mailroom or in the campaign of John Kerry's campaign in 2004. So being able to keep those relationships up for 16, 17 years, that's not easy. And doing so in a way that's authentic, right? So I send postcards to people. Like I text, like, how is your, genuine contact with folks, as opposed to being like, hi, I just met you with this thing, give me a job. So rather than do that, keep a real connection with someone over the years. So when I'm in this job, all I gotta do is be like, yo, how you been? I need to talk to you. instead of being like, hey, I know I haven't talked to you in 10 years, right? So just keeping up with folks as a matter of course, because relationships require work. And so putting in the work to maintain those relationships allows you to be able to draw upon different people to get different bits of information in order for you to inform your strategy. And the last thing I would say is being able to look at something from both micro and macro at the same time. You got to be able to see where you are in this moment and how this moment gets you to where you want to go. And so like having that through line of like being super focused in the moment and how is this action going to effectuate our long-term strategy. One quick example. During the impeachment process, my colleagues wanted us to take out full-page ads calling the Speaker of the House a coward. And I was like, under no circumstance am I going to do that in general. And if impeachment happens, we don't want to be on the blacklist. And so they were like, Reggie, you're wrong. I'm like, trust me on this. So guess what? When impeachment became a thing, my ability in that moment to stand firm, remember all the things I've been telling you. So integrity, long-term strategy, and short-term strategy. So in that moment when my colleagues were in their fields, like, you're wrong, this is crazy, she needs to be blah. Me looking at them and be like, I completely disagree with you, and here's why I disagree. So being able to do that, knowing that if and when impeachment became a thing, that I was going to be looked to help. So that's one example I would use. So in that moment, that was a lot of pressure to look like 15 people in the face and be like, I disagree, and here's why. And knowing that if and when it became a thing, that decision would make that decision on the other end possible.
So what advice do you have for someone looking for a job with the Political Action Committee?
Know your why. First of all, why? Why do you want to do it, right? If you want to do it just for a job, that's not enough sometimes, right? So MoveOn, I believe that the values that MoveOn represents are the values that the world should live under. And or not even live under, because that's too totalitarian, I'm not that fascist, but should be buttressed in and be a part of our culture so that everyone can thrive and be a part of that world. If you aren't that committed to the values of the organization, it's hard to remain when things get tough, right? So in the dog days of impeachment, when everyone thought nothing was going to happen, if I didn't know my why, it would have been hard for me to stay, right? And the other thing I would say is that don't be afraid to have conversations with people. What do I mean by that? Talk to folks, like ask people how and why did you do this? Like why is that important? Because again, you have all this, you'll be able to get all this information to inform your decision making to decide whether or not that's for you. Because I mean, what I do, I try and be a mentor to a lot of folks, because if you talk to me for 15 minutes, I may say something in that 15-minute conversation that will keep you out of a job that you hated for 2.5 years, right? So talk to as many people as you can to get an understanding of what you want, and then operate from what you want to do in the world, as opposed to like necessarily like chasing something to get you somewhere.
So we have a lot of questions lately about getting into politics mid-career. What's your advice for people looking to change their career to politics? And do you have any specific advice for, actually, I think we should focus on the people who want to come in mid-career first.
So mid-career, we need you, right? We need people who have different experiences that just makes the process richer. It makes everything a lot more full. So if you have been a lawyer for a while and then want to come in politics, great. If you've done something else, I just use lawyer because it was top of mind, but the experience that you had prior to politics will inform policy conversations, will inform strategic conversations, will inform opportunities that you just, because you have that different lens, because there are a lot of people on the Hill, for better or for worse, that have gone from job to job to job to job, and it's only been policy. It hasn't been And so because I have a business degree, I can talk about budgets. I can talk about these sorts of things because I've worked in entertainment, like because I've done all of these different things, it makes me a unique operative. It makes me a different value add to the conversation. It also makes me a value add to the community. So that's one thing. So value your experience is number one. Number two is that maybe your start is running for office, right? So rather than looking for a job, run for office. Maybe that's one of the answers. Or start going to like clubs when we can again, and or conversation groups to just offer your experience, because more often than not, this is how it was in pre-pandemic, but if you know what you're talking about, you're going to rise to the top of a conversation, right? There are a lot of people who are like, blah. It's like, for those of you who were in college seminars, that one person in the seminar where you were just like, yo, you talking again, yo? That happens in the professional world sometimes too, where someone's like, well, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yo, could you please stop saying the same thing again, right? So if you have different experience and can offer that in the company of a chief of staff or a LD or a CFO or whatever, that sticks out. Like, part of the reason that I got some of the jobs I got is because I would be in a crowd of like a town hall or something, and I would sit there like this, and then I would ask a question, and they were like, whoa, that's a sharp question. And I'm like, that's what I see. But because I was able to offer it from a unique experience, someone was like, who is that guy? So be the person when someone says, who is that guy? It's in a good way, not like, who is that guy? I wish they would leave, right? So use your uniqueness to your advantage in conversations, but also, maybe your first foray is running for office or being a mentor to someone. Another thing that we don't do enough of, when Amy and Allison put this out there, I actually jumped. Like, I got the email and was like, are you looking for people to talk? Right? So put yourself out there like this. If you've got a unique experience that could be of benefit to someone, share it. Because here I go in my yoga teacher bent. When you share freely from your gifts, they come back to you. When you share freely from your experience, it comes back to you. It may not come back in a way like, oh, it's going to come back at next Friday at 7 o'clock. But when it comes back, it's meant for you.
And so for people who have no experience and who are just starting their careers, what advice would you give them?
Know your why, honestly, right? So, and the other thing I'll say is that when you know what you want to do, you make a compelling case, right? So, it's better to be prepared and not have an opportunity to show up than to have an opportunity to show up and not be prepared, right? So you just never know who's going to be in a Zoom room or who's going to be in a conversation. So you say the one thing. I'll give you another example. I regularly do briefings with members of Congress, and I said, I don't even know what I said, but I said something, and someone found me through my website and was just like, what you said inspired me. Thank you for that. So that can happen if you're speaking from the heart in service to making someone's day better. You just never know how that far will go. And hear me out, because I know in some of these things people want, what's the checklist? Sometimes there's no checklist. Sometimes life is art, right? So embrace the journey, have conversations, like try something that you don't like necessarily, like expand your discomfort and meaning like the comfort zone, make your comfort zone big, that even when you're uncomfortable, you're cool. Because what that does, it just opens you up to opportunities that you never knew that you would be possible. One quick thing about that. My first job I shared, I was a roadie for a jazz band. So you know how that happened? Because I wrote for the Daily News. I wrote music reviews for the Daily News. And so this guy, I wrote a review for his band, and he got a job from that review. And then he was in a conversation with someone. They're like, hey, we're looking for someone to help manage this fall tour. And so he calls me and is like, Hubbard, can you come to New York? I got a job for you. And I'm like, what? But it's because I wrote the article, Right? So I wrote the article, they got him the job, and he was so psyched about the job that when this thing came his way, he's like, yo, here. So that's what I mean by that. Just be open and be free. You just never know what's going to happen.
Well, I'm really curious about your answer for this next question. Who is the most powerful woman that has impacted your career?
Positively or negatively?
How about both?
Okay. So I come from a long line of strong Southern Black women, right? So my mother and my two grandmas, I still have one of my grandmas, she's 93. They loved this Black boy so much that when white supremacy came at him, he didn't care, right? He was so loved and nurtured to be his full self that when society tried to be like, you can't do this, you're not smart enough, all of those things, like my mother and grandmothers and aunties, so like all the Black women in my life took such good care of me that when America tried to come in and do what it tries to do, like destroy us, I was just like, whatever, you know, nah. So that's positive. So all the Black women in my life, so mother, grandmothers, aunties, because they gave me the confidence to endure the rough and tumble nature of politics and business, right? It's pretty cutthroat sometimes. So sometimes when people stab you in the back, you got to be okay with that because, you know, that's just kind of how it goes sometimes, not to absolve it, but that's the game. And so I was given such love by my fam that when all those things happen, so for instance, when I was in a situation where I was like unable to find a gig, my mom was just like, come stay with us, right? You'll figure it out. So rather than be like, oh my goodness, like my son's a failure, you know what I mean? Like, how you gonna be in your 30s and not have a job, blah, 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 blah. So all this stuff, she just loved me unconditionally and allowed me to figure it out. So that's the positive. And negative, I would say, is that the women that I worked with in Colorado that treated me so poorly gave me this yoga practice. They gave me the peace and the Zen that has allowed me to help flip the House and change Amendment 4 in Florida and impeach a president and all these other things, right? So like the unconditional love of my mom and the women in my life and like the negativity that I experienced with my nonprofit job, the combination of those two have made me just kind of like, okay, what you got, world? Bring it, let's get it.
All right, we're gonna switch to more specific audience questions. And our first one is from Crystal Ramirez, who asks, what's the best way to offer pro bono services to campaigns? I've been reaching out, but haven't received responses, sad face.
Love the emoji talk, it's so good. Number one, I would say is it depends on which campaign, right? So you may need to seek to offer your services to not a non-high profile campaign. So what if someone's running for state rep? What if someone's running for state legislature? What if someone's running for, so it may not be the Biden-Harris ticket or it may not be the Senate, but you can help someone get onto the local legislature who may have more to do with your quality of life, because like if you help someone get on the school board or you help someone become a judge, judges, and they knock out someone who doesn't value your worldview, then that is actually doing more for all of us. So you get someone in the state legislature and maybe that sets them up for Congress, maybe that sets them up for whatever. So I would say number one, like maybe you need to consider alternative campaigns. So maybe just not necessarily the high profile ones. And be persistent, right? You know, we don't have enough time to talk about it, but I got out of the mailroom because I put this face in other people's faces. And was just like, so last time I checked, you know, it's to your advantage to have someone who's smart and Black in a front-facing role and not in the mailroom, right? So maybe not be so in your face, but again, this is clearly pre-yoga, but you got to be your fiercest advocate sometimes, you know, and just because someone says no, that's their job. Your job is to keep telling you yes until someone else tells you yes.
Well, this next question comes from Nancy McDonald. How do I best stay in the know about progressive candidates that are early on starting a campaign?
There are, I actually don't have a good answer for that. I mean, there are some websites to pay attention to that aren't coming to mind, top of mind. But actually something just came to me. It may be your fierce organizer that hasn't run for office yet. You know what I mean? Like, who are some of the people that are leading some of the protests now? Right? So Cori Bush, who is coming to Congress, and I may have an opportunity to interview in a couple of weeks. Like, she started out as an organizer in Ferguson, right? So who are some of the people right now that are in the community that are making a difference? And maybe they haven't announced, maybe they have no intention of ever announcing, but people who are doing the change in community now, or I wouldn't say just have social media profiles, because you need to do something with your profiles, yo. Like, just because you got hella followers and ain't doing nothing with it, ain't nobody got time for that. I'd rather have less followers who are doing something than hella people who pat me on the back and ain't about it. So that's what I would say to that. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. As for next question, and it's a question I have too.
Yes.
How can Brant and Nancy asked, how can young campaign staffers utilize their recent experiences from campaigns after Election Day has passed?
One, I would say, is that start writing out what you do so you know how to sell it. Meaning, when I did Advance, I didn't understand that that was production, right? It was event production. So when I worked in Bernie Sanders' campaign and produced his address, his concession at the 2016 Democratic Convention, I was the executive producer for that. So when I started talking to people after 2016, I said I was the executive producer because that's what I was. So learn, when I mean write it out, like start talking about your experience in the language that the people understand. No one knows what Advance is, but people have a better idea of what production is. So one thing I would say is translate your experience into a language or a dialect that someone else speaks. That's number one. Number two is that don't be afraid to volunteer. I mean, it can only be like, it doesn't have to be like the old days where they wanted you to volunteer gratis, but you can offer 5 amazing hours in service to someone or something. There are 168 hours in a week, right? You can offer 5, I'm not saying this about y'all, but whoever, spend less time like this and like spend like 5 dedicated hours in service to someone. That expands your network. It actually broadens your skills, and it gives you the understanding of how your skills that you acquired over a campaign can be applicable. Because the biggest problem that I've noticed, even on the Hill, is that if campaigners, you know, we're a rare breed. We just don't know how to sell ourselves all the time, right? So learn to sell yourself. So for instance, when I would travel in Advance, like city to city to city to city, I would say handles, what would I say? Is adept at managing logistical complexity, right? As opposed to being like, I traveled hella places, right? Adept at handling logistical complexity. So that sets you up for ops conversations. It sets you up for all these other conversations. So be creative with your experience and learn how to tailor it to someone as opposed to expecting them to understand it. We got to learn how to sell better.
And do you have any like specific advice about where you can best volunteer?
Volunteer in areas that are of interest to you. So for instance, I used to teach civics in high school. So I love mentorship, right? I love that. So if there is an issue or candidate or issue set that's of interest to you, make yourself available, right? So specific advice is, again, know your why. What lights you up? What makes you excited? Because you're going to do better work for something that you care about than just something like looking at your phone, hoping it gets to 5 o'clock. You know what I mean? So like, do work on what strikes you as experience that you want to get into, and then go for it. Because people also notice when you care.
Sorry for the delay. Cameron Russell asks, what specific advice would you have for job seekers looking for remote work, do not live in the DC or New York areas?
So my question is, do they want to be in the DC or New York area? So, or is that, I don't understand the geographical bent. And here's why I say it that way, because the pandemic, so I'll use an example of my yoga teaching practice. I get online and I have people in my yoga classes from Dublin, Ireland to Maui, Hawaii. So the geography matters less and less these days, right? So if you want to be somewhere, or you want to be with a company, or you want to be with an organization, in a pandemic, like, number one, who's going to pay moving expenses? And number two, just like we're all working like this. This is becoming radically normalized. So be less concerned about the geography at present and be more concerned about the opportunity that exists outside of the geography.
And I can really speak to that because I'm in Texas right now and firm is in Washington, DC. So just go for it.
Right.
Yeah. This next question is from Brandon Marcus. He says, what's your advice for someone who's worked in field operations trying to transition into another lane in progressive politics?
So field gives you the following skills. So again, learn to map your skills to other opportunities. It gives you an understanding of data. It gives you an understanding of actionable data. It gives you an understanding of people, and it gives you an understanding of the messages that compel people to work towards the goal that you've set forth as a campaign, right? So being able to articulate that, you can do that anywhere, because every elected official has constituency outreach. They need to know how to get in touch with their people and motivate them. Field preps you for that. Like, another thing that I would say is that every organization from MoveOn on down, especially if they're member focused, like some of the best member services people that I've seen across the progressive ecosystem have field background, because you know what motivates people. Like you had to, like in the old days, like get people to turn in their sheets and cut and all those things, right? So you understand like what motivates people. Like you've probably like created relationships with people, and you've got to sometimes create relationships out of thin air. That's not common. That's not easy, right? So being able to articulate what you can do with data, how you can inspire members, and like your ability to form relationships that aren't just relationships that don't have any purpose, right? So mapping out your skills, again, using your skill set in a dialect that someone else speaks, can open you up to so many other things. And I hope that metaphor sticks with you, because we have the skills, we just don't know how to talk about the skills, and we have to learn how to talk about them.
This next question comes from the Q&A box. It says, thank you, Reggie and the GAIN team. Reggie, I met you at Advanced Camp and for increased diversity and the inclusion in the advanced world.
Yeah.
I tried for months to get an advanced job this cycle and failed many times to break into the quote unquote club. Yeah. Do you have suggestions for getting an advanced job next cycle? Thank you.
No worries. So thank you to, did they say their name?
No name.
Okay. Well, shout out to whoever that was, because that was probably one of the most memorable days of my career, because I was on stage. Make a very long story short, remember what I said about integrity? Be careful, because sometimes it shows up. Like, we were at Howard University and they were talking about diversity, and I was the only Black person on stage. And so I was like, I can't be at Howard and be quiet. This is crazy. So the one thing I would say is that know your why. Like, what, just if they said no, sometimes that's doing you a favor, right? So know why you want to do it. And if you can understand the why, and I'll say, if it's just like, cause it's cool, that's not good enough, right? Like for me, I wanted to do it because I knew that my skills as a marketer and a roadie put together gave me a unique skill set to throw bomb ass shows, right? I knew that. So know your why, and know that, again, sometimes someone telling you no is the biggest gift that they can give you. So I wouldn't say it failed. Maybe they kept you from because think about it this way. There were so many campaigns, and then there was one, and then a pandemic hit. A lot of the people that I know that like put their eggs in the basket of advance, now that we're not traveling, so I would say that you actually won to some extent, because you know you didn't get you weren't subjected to that craziness in this cycle. So consider, and you know, if you were at that speech, you got my email address, so holler at me, and if the answer I just gave was insufficient, holler at me and I'll give you a better one. But yeah, the one thing I would say to that is sometimes people telling you no is the biggest gift that you've ever been given.
This next question, it's pretty deep, from Hannah Purcell. She said, can you speak to the inner conflict often present for folks working to decolonize themselves and subvert capitalist expectations?
One more time.
Can you speak to the inner conflict often present for folks working to decolonize themselves and to subvert capitalist expectations?
I mean, to some extent, that is the work, right? And that's how yoga and meditation have helped me, because they've given me such deep awareness into notions that I didn't know that I held, right? So I used to think I was super woke, whatever, and then would catch myself saying certain things like, ooh, like what? Like that came out your mouth, homie? Like, yeah, you know, so the conflict is the opportunity for growth. So I would say, like, shift the lens a bit. And if the conflict is coming up, then that means that you're doing good work. And it means that you're giving yourself the space necessary to reprogram the way you orient to the world in a way to offer something that's truly of service, right? So decolonizing yourself is messy. And as you succeed at it, it gives you an opportunity to be more of service from a pure place and not from any of these fractured intentions that have caused the problems that we're having in society at the moment.
I'm not sure if I should go for this last question, but
Go for it.
actually, no, it is very important. Rachel Pinto says, hello, thank you so much for sharing some wisdom. Do you have any job openings at MoveOn? I'm sure a lot of us would like to work for you.
I don't have job openings in my department, but bear in mind that, you know, here's what I'll say. Like, you never know how life turns out, right? So I work at MoveOn today. I may be starting my own thing someday, right? So just keep that in mind. And I would encourage you to like consider what you have to offer, because the last thing I'll share is this, and Amy talked a little bit about it. Like, so the teaching practice, Active Peace Yoga, came about so it came about in a pandemic. You know, like I had no intention of being a teacher. I actually ran away from it for quite some time. I was just like, who wants to do this, right? And what I noticed is that the experiences that I had were of service to other people. So that thing that people may call fringe, but you love doing, figure out a way to offer that to someone and then make that your business, or maybe even make it your side hustle, right? And then as you make it your side hustle, maybe your side hustle can become your main hustle. But to be explicit, I don't have job openings at the moment. MoveOn has one, I think. And, you know, keeping like the website that Amy just posted in the chat has my contact info in there. So you can get in touch with me through the website. And I hope that this has been as fun for you as it has been for me. I love this stuff.
Did y'all get through most of the questions? I've been going up and down. I have to say they're doing a really good job. I'm pleasantly surprised. I think we got
How many more left?
Some of them were a little bit redundant, so I think you basically hit on the core of them, but you've got it there.
Did we get all the themes? We got them all?
Yeah, that's what I feel like. I feel like we hit the themes. We definitely hit the themes.
Okay.
Yeah, I always enjoy these. I particularly have enjoyed this. I always enjoy seeing you, Reggie, you know that. I was telling Josie and Aviance that, you know, when I received the news last Friday night about RBG passing, I was literally just about to walk the dog, and I was walking, I had walked out the door. And my first reaction, my very first reaction was, I really want a glass of wine. For those of you who know me, I'm about 3 months sober right now, which is, my second reaction is, I need Reggie. And I was like, perfect timing, because he has a class right now. And that was true, but that was sincere. It was just like having community and having that space that you offer is really special. So I hope for folks who have enjoyed this session that you take the time to join Reggie in one of his classes, whether it's in yoga or meditation, and you do offer a nice diverse set of different types of classes. For those of you who like Prince, every once in a while there's a Prince special class. There's some other theme classes. So it's a pretty magical experience. And aside from the fact that you're obviously my friend, and have become my friend, what I appreciated about it is beyond just, I go to a lot of yoga classes, or at least I used to in the before times. So it isn't just for the practice, it's for the community. And I really appreciate the community that you've built there. So again, if folks have enjoyed this, join the community, join our community. I consider it my community as well. It's really been a pretty special thing. And I just want to thank you for making time, as you often do, not just for us here today, but for so many. I know you do a lot of sessions for a lot of groups, and you've really become, I've watched you grow just even the last few months, but crazy times, right? And I know that you are playing a significant role in the fights that we have that are so present right now. So I thank you for that. I thank you for joining. I thank all of our participants for being part of this. So many of you I know from all over. I'm recognizing a few names who've made a point to come and visit us in a couple other sessions. So I'm glad that people are really finding this a good time and useful. I know we do. Yeah, thanks always to Josie and Aviance too.
As you close, Amy, yeah, Josie and Aviance, thank you. And if I didn't answer your question, holler at me. I hate that, right? So like if I didn't answer your question to your satisfaction, find me on the website. I'll answer it, right? Because no one wants to talk to someone and be like, yo, that was cute, but that's not what I, like, take me up on my challenge, right? If I didn't answer your question, holler at me.
So thank you. So next week, we've got one more session. I think we're going to take a break through the election after that. Next week, we're hosting Jessica Post, who's the executive director of the DL.
Not next week, the 8th.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Allison.
October 8th.
Am I messing up? I messed up. Allison will correct me and put it in. It's all in the emails and the sites and all the things. I will give a tiny tidbit, which is without any details, but just as a bit of a teaser, which is we are working already to plan some significant post-election events. No matter what happens, no matter what the outcome, we know a lot of people are going to be needing a lot more support after the election and sort of next steps and what happens. Win, lose, draw, the fight will go on in every which way. So we've got a lot of, I hope, fun plans for that. Anything else I should have said, Allison, or said incorrectly?
Nope, I think you got it. I put some stuff in the chat, so.
Good deal.
If you ever thought about joining a state legislative race, Jessica will be a good person to hear from.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you for all for participating. We really appreciate you being part of this community. It's an important community, especially in this moment when we have such significant challenges and threats to our democracy. Never has our work felt more important, never has an election felt more important. So thank you all for the role that you play, whoever you may work for, wherever you may be. I know you're here because you care and you're dedicated to it. So much gratitude for all of that. Thanks all. I'm gonna wrap it up with that.
Love and grace.
Love and grace.